Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a pretty fascinating white paper from a group called the American Epistemology Institute. It's titled Rebuilding the Ramparts, and, it makes a pretty bold claim that America is in the middle of a war for reality itself.
Right out of the gate, the paper hits you with this statement. It says, we are in a new type of war that makes no distinction between soldier and civilian. So, according to the authors, this isn't some far-off threat we need to prepare for. No, they're arguing it's happening right now, all around us.
All right, so to really get what they're saying, we're going to follow their roadmap. First, we'll look at what they call America's foundation of realism. Then we'll get into their diagnosis of a war on reality. And finally, we'll check out the solution they're proposing, a system they call heirs and a whole new doctrine for how to act.
Okay, first up, the foundation of realism. The whole argument here is that you can't really defend something unless you know what it is. For them, that means defining what they call America's original metaphysic.
And at the very heart of that is this idea, metaphysical realism. Now, what does that mean? It's basically the belief that there's a real world out there separate from our thoughts about it. And truth? Well, that's just what happens when our ideas correctly match up with that reality. To the authors of this paper, this isn't just some dusty philosophical concept. They argue it's the very bedrock of the entire American project. So the paper tries to back this up with a bit of history. It points to all these different intellectual traditions, like Scottish common sense realism, which, in a nutshell, argues that our senses give us a pretty direct line to the world, and also things like classical theism and natural law. The big idea they're pushing is that all these traditions, in their own way, shared a fundamental belief in an objective, knowable reality and a fixed moral order.
So, if that's the foundation they're describing, what's the threat? Well, that brings us to their second section, the war on reality, and what they diagnose as metaphysical subversion.
And this is where their argument really takes shape. They frame the whole conflict like this. On one side, you've got realism, which says reality is objective and we discover it. On the other side, you have what they call constructivism, which says reality is subjective. It's something we build together through language and culture. The paper presents these as two totally incompatible worldviews that are quite literally at war. And to really drive home how serious they think this is, they pull out this quote from Vice Admiral James Stockdale. He said, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality." The paper uses this to say, hey, we're not being negative here. We're just confronting a brutal fact. And, for the EEI, this isn't just some intellectual disagreement playing out in universities. They claim it's an active conflict, one that uses the techniques of what's called fifth-generation warfare, or 5GW. You can think of it as a kind of war where the main battlefield is your mind. It's about using stories, narratives, and psychops to literally try and reprogram how people think. Okay, so after painting that pretty dire picture, the paper shifts gears and starts talking about its solution. And that's section 3, introducing the ARS system, a tool they've come up with to, fight back. So, what exactly is this American Realist Evaluation System, or ARS? Well, it's basically a 3-step method for analyzing, just about anything, from new laws to social movements. The whole point is to have a systematic way to figure out which worldview, realism, or constructivism is really pulling the strings behind the scenes of any given policy or idea. But Ares is just the tool, right? A tool needs a strategy. And that brings us to section 4, this doctrine of strategic realism. It's built on 4 core principles for what the AEI calls its counteroffensive. Principle number 1 is something they call metaphysical stewardship. It's basically a call to action. They're saying you cannot give up the language of truth. The paper is really insistent that its followers have to be out there proactively saying that reality is objective and that this fact just isn't up for negotiation. Principle 2 is dialectical refusal, and this one's all about tactics. The idea here is to refuse to play the game on your opponent's terms. It's kind of like if someone invites you to play a game where they made up all the rules to make sure you lose. The paper says, don't even sit down at the table. Just arguing within their framework, in their view, gives it legitimacy. Next is narrative inversion, and this is where you can really see the offensive part of their strategy. This isn't about playing defense. This principle says you need to go out and actively identify and relabel what the AEI calls anti-American metaphysics. The goal is to try and seize control of the public conversation.
And the fourth and final principle is constructive revival. This is the part that looks to the future. It's not just about fighting against something. The strategy demands building something new institutions, new school curricula, a whole new infrastructure, all based on their idea of metaphysical realism.
So you have the doctrine, you have the principles. How does that all translate into what you actually do? Well, that brings us to the last section, the plan in action, where they get down to specific tactical objectives.
And here, the paper gets super concrete. It calls for using that Aries framework to run metaphysical audits. It says they should publish reports exposing what they see as 5GW methods and push their own curricula into civil institutions. And, maybe most tellingly, it calls for rejecting ideas like pluralism or consensus if they're being used to replace what the paper calls the objective good. Now, this section gives us a really important definition that's, well, central to their whole argument. According to the AEI, anti-Americanism isn't what you might think. Their definition is any actor or institution denying the objectivity of truth, morality, or human nature as created. So it's a very specific, philosophical definition that really frames their entire strategy.
The paper wraps up with the exact same urgency it started with, leaving absolutely no doubt about where they stand. Its final definitive statement is a stark warning. The metaphysical war is not coming. It is here. So the AEI's entire argument really treats ideas not just as concepts to be debated, but as actual weapons in a conflict. And that really leaves us with the big central question at the heart of their paper. If ideas truly are weapons, then who gets to define the battlefield?